Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez was born on February 14, 1990, in San Francisco County, California. His father was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the man the world would come to know as El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. His mother was Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, a woman from a family that had been involved in drug trafficking since the 1970s. He had two sisters, Jessica Johanna and Laisha, and from the time he was old enough to understand what his father did for a living, his path was already being drawn for him. By the age of 14, Ruben was working alongside his father and other top figures in the Mexican drug trade. He was not in school. He was not playing sports. He was learning how to move drugs across borders, how to manage money that came from selling cocaine and methamphetamine, and how to use violence to protect the family business. His defense attorneys would later argue in a United States courtroom that Ruben never had a real choice, that he was recruited into the cartel as a child, that the life he ended up living was the only life anyone in his family ever showed him. Whether or not that changes how you feel about what he did, it is a fact that his involvement in organized crime began when most kids are still in middle school. As he grew older, Ruben climbed the ranks of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel quickly. According to the Mexican government and the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, he became the second in command of the entire organization, answering only to his father. He went by several nicknames: El Menchito, El Junior, El Rubencito, El Rojo. But the name that stuck was El Menchito, a smaller version of his father's nickname, El Mencho. It was a name that carried weight. Within the cartel, he did not just sit behind a desk. According to statements made in court and testimony from witnesses during his trial, Ruben personally oversaw drug shipments heading to the United States, managed hitmen, recruited soldiers, and was responsible for enforcing discipline across the day. Organization. The DEA identified him as a primary figure in trafficking more than 50 metric tons of cocaine and supervising drug laboratories that produced more than 1,000 metric tons of methamphetamine. Those are not small numbers. Those are industrial-scale drug operations. On January 30th, 2014, Mexican Special Forces raided a residence in the Patria Universidad neighborhood of Zapopan, Jalisco, at around 3:30 in the morning. Ruben was asleep inside. When he heard the doors being broken down, he jumped out of bed, ran to the backyard, climbed the back wall, and tried to escape into his neighbor's property. The Special Forces unit had already surrounded the entire area. He had nowhere to go. He was arrested in his neighbor's backyard. 2 of his bodyguards surrendered at the front door without a fight. 2 others who were renting a nearby house tried to run, but were caught as well. When officers detained Ruben, he reportedly offered them around 17 million Mexican pesos to let him walk. They did not take the money. Authorities found between 10 and 16 million pesos in cash and $500,000 US at the scene, along with 4 assault rifles, 9 handguns, a grenade, and several rounds of ammunition. In response to his arrest that morning, CJNG gunmen hijacked 3 buses across the Guadalajara area and set them on fire. The United States consulate in Guadalajara sent a warning to American citizens, telling them to avoid the southern part of the city. That is the kind of reaction his arrest caused. One man gets taken into custody, and an entire metropolitan area goes into lockdown. Ruben was sent to the Altiplano maximum security prison. But what happened next showed just how broken parts of Mexico's justice system were at the time. On October 16, 2014, after roughly 11 months in custody, a judge released him for lack of evidence. He walked out of prison, and agents from Mexico's Criminal Investigation Agency were standing right there waiting for him. They arrested him again immediately on new charges. 2 months later, in December 2014, another judge looked at the evidence and once again said it was not enough. He was released a second time. Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, the second in command of one of the most dangerous cartels on the planet, was free. He stayed free for about 6 months. On June 23, 2015, the Mexican Army and federal police moved on a gated neighborhood called Lomas de Altamira in Zapopan, Jalisco, at around 2:15 in the morning. The operation took about 20 minutes. Officers arrived in several vehicles, forced the entrance guard to kneel, shot out the security cameras with paintball guns to blind them, destroyed several more cameras, and cut the electricity to the area. Ruben was found inside a vehicle with his brother-in-law, Julio Alberto Castillo Rodriguez. No shots were fired. Authorities confiscated 2 customized AR-15 assault rifles. One was engraved with the letters CJNG 02JR. The other read, Menchito. According to government sources, Ruben had undergone nose surgery to change his appearance and had been traveling without bodyguards to avoid drawing attention. His identity was confirmed through DNA tests and photo evidence. He was released again about a month later when a judge ordered it. And once more, the moment he stepped out, authorities rearrested him on new charges, this time connected to 2 cases of forced disappearance. From that point on, Ruben remained in Mexican custody, but the legal fight was far from over. Mexico's Attorney General's office formally approved his extradition to the United States in 2018. Ruben fought it. He filed multiple appeals trying to block the transfer. Every single one was denied. On February 21, 2020, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez was put on a plane and flown to Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C. He appeared before a federal judge that same day. The charges waiting for him were severe. The United States government accused him of conspiring to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine and 500 grams or more of methamphetamine, knowing those drugs would be brought into the United States. He was also charged with using, carrying, and brandishing firearms, including destructive devices, in connection with drug trafficking. And there was a separate case tied to one of the most violent incidents in the history of Mexico's drug war. On May 1, 2015, the Mexican military launched an operation to capture El Mencho in the small town of Villa Purificación, Jalisco. 4 helicopters carrying soldiers and federal police officers flew over a CJNG convoy that was protecting El Mencho. Cartel members on the ground opened fire using rocket-propelled grenade launchers and military-grade weapons. They shot one of the helicopters out of the sky. 9 law enforcement officers died. It was the first time in the entire Mexican drug war that organized crime had shot down a military aircraft. Multiple others were wounded, including a federal police officer who survived the crash with burns over 70% of his body and was left permanently disfigured. According to prosecutors, Ruben directed that attack. He gave the order to shoot the helicopter down to allow his father to escape. The trial took place in September 2024 in a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. It lasted 2 weeks. Prosecutors laid out the full scope of what Ruben had done over nearly 7 years of running the cartel alongside his father. According to statements made in court and witness testimony, he ordered the murder of more than 100 people. He personally shot and killed at least 2. In April 2015, just weeks before the helicopter attack, prosecutors said Ruben slashed the throats of 5 men who owed him money for drugs sold in the United States. The men were bound. He used a half-moon-shaped knife. One of the eyewitnesses who was present described how, after he finished, he asked for a clean shirt. His defense attorneys tried to present a different picture. They argued that Ruben was recruited into the cartel at 14 and never had a real chance at a different life. They asked for a 40-year sentence instead of life, pointing out that everything he was convicted of happened outside of United States territory. His attorney, Anthony Colombo, said after the trial that this should have been a case tried in Mexico, not in the United States. On September 20, 2024, the federal jury found Ruben guilty on all counts. 4 days later, on September 24th, he was convicted on additional drug trafficking and firearms charges in a separate case. On March 7, 2025, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez stood in a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., with his left hand behind his back, as United States District Judge Beryl Howell handed down the sentence. Life in prison plus 30 years to be served consecutively. The judge also ordered him to forfeit more than $6 billion in drug trafficking proceeds. Judge Howell called the Jalisco New Generation Cartel a notoriously violent cartel, and noted that Ruben had a whole team of hitmen at his command. DEA. Acting Administrator Derek Maltz said in a statement that Ruben was not only extremely violent, but was one of the earliest architects of fentanyl trafficking that led to the deadliest chapter of the synthetic opioid crisis. Prosecutors had placed him at the same level as Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in their sentencing documents. Former Attorney General Merrick Garland said after the guilty verdict that El Menchito led the Jalisco cartel's efforts to use murder, kidnapping, and torture to build the cartel into a self-described empire by manufacturing fentanyl and flooding the United States with massive quantities of lethal drugs. Attorney General Pam Bondi added that Ruben helped build the CJNG into a brutal terrorist organization that pumps poison onto our streets and commits horrific acts of violence. Ruben's attorney Anthony Colombo told reporters after the sentencing that the life term was greater than necessary and that he would file an appeal. Less than a year after his sentencing, on February 22, 2026, the Mexican army killed Ruben's father, El Mencho, during a military operation in the town of Tapalpa, Jalisco. El Mencho was wounded in a firefight with special forces and died while being airlifted to a hospital. The $15 million bounty on his head was never collected through an informant. He went down the same way he lived, surrounded by gunfire. Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez will never see his father's grave. He will never walk out of a United States federal prison. The boy who was brought into the drug trade at 14, who became the second in command of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, who ordered the deaths of more than 100 people, who helped shoot a military helicopter out of the sky, and who personally cut the throats of 5 bound men with a curved knife, will spend every remaining day of his life behind bars. The $6 billion in drug money he was ordered to forfeit is a number so large it barely feels real. But the sentence is real. The prison walls are real. And the people he killed are never coming back. His father built an empire and lost every member of his family to the consequences of it. His son got life. His daughter got arrested walking into a courthouse. His wife got locked up for laundering money. His son-in-law faked his own death and got caught living in a luxury house in California. His brothers both ended up in custody, and now El Mencho himself is dead. The Oseguera family built the most powerful cartel in Mexico, and the United States government took it apart, one family member at a time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section number 2. Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez was born in 1987 in California. Like her brother Ruben, she held dual citizenship in the United States and Mexico. Her father was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Her mother was Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, whose family had been running drug operations since the 1970s. Jessica grew up between California, the state of Michoacán, and Guadalajara, Jalisco. People who knew her described her as religious, kind, someone who gave tamales and blankets to people in hospitals, who collected toys and bicycles to give to neighborhood kids on Christmas. She studied marketing at the Western Institute of Technology and Higher Education, a private university in Guadalajara, and graduated in 2009. To her friends and family, she was a businesswoman. To the United States government, she was a money launderer, hiding behind sushi restaurants and tequila brands. Her nickname in cartel circles was La Negra. Her husband was a man named Julio Alberto Castillo Rodriguez, who went by the alias El Ojo de Vidrio. He was first arrested on May 1, 2015, the same day the CJNG shot down a Mexican military helicopter during a massive attack across Jalisco. Castillo Rodriguez was released on July 1st of that year for lack of evidence, but was rearrested on April 6, 2016, for his involvement with the CJNG. He was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department in October 2016 for providing support to the cartel's drug trafficking operations. He is believed to still be behind bars in Mexico. Jessica had 2 children with him. When she eventually got arrested in the United States, she left those 2 children back in Guadalajara in the care of her mother, Rosalinda. Jessica's involvement in the family business started in September 2009, the same year she graduated from university. According to the U.S. government's sentencing documents, she founded an advertising agency called J&P Advertising. By 2012, she had set up 4 more businesses in Mexico. One was a tequila brand called Unze Black. Another was a sushi restaurant called Mizu Sushi Lounge. There was a rental cabin business called Las Flores Cabañas, which later changed its name to La Loma. And there was a company called JJGON. The sushi restaurant later changed its name to Kenzo Sushi. But according to prosecutors, it kept the same logo, the same phone number, the same chefs, and the same menu. Jessica also transferred ownership of the restaurant to the sushi chefs on paper. But according to the government's sentencing documents, she continued to maintain control of the operation behind the scenes. These were not innocent businesses. According to the United States Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, known as OFAC, all 6 of these companies provided material support to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. In April 2015, OFAC sanctioned the CJNG and the related organization Los Queenies, and specifically named Jessica's father, El Mencho, and her uncle, Abigail González Valencia, as foreign narcotics traffickers under the Kingpin Act. In September 2015, OFAC went further and directly sanctioned the 6 businesses connected to Jessica. That meant it was illegal for any U.S. person or entity to do business with those companies. It also meant that Jessica, as a U.S. citizen, was breaking the law if she continued to be involved with them. And here is where the story becomes difficult to understand from the outside. Because OFAC did not just quietly add Jessica's companies to a list somewhere. They went out of their way to make sure she knew. According to court documents, OFAC hand-delivered and mailed notifications about the sanctions to relatives of Jessica in California, including her aunt and uncle. They also contacted a California address that Jessica herself had listed on her passport application. OFAC sent notifications to 4 different email addresses that the government found associated with Jessica and her businesses. When a web hosting company learned of the sanctions, it identified one of Jessica's companies through a 26-minute phone call from her personal phone and cut ties. Domain registrations for several of the businesses were shut down. She was told, multiple times, in multiple ways, through letters, through emails, through her own family members. The United States government made it clear that these businesses were sanctioned, that continuing to operate them or do financial transactions through them was a federal crime, and that there would be consequences. Jessica did not get a license from OFAC to continue those transactions. She did not sell her ownership stakes. She did not step away. According to the Department of Justice, she kept going. There was also a deeper layer to her involvement. According to the government's sentencing documents, prosecutors had a witness who would have testified that in 2011, El Mencho himself directed that certain drug accounting ledgers be provided to Jessica so that she could confront a cartel member who was suspected of stealing from the organization. The same witness said they saw El Mencho and Jessica together as recently as 2013, and that they met at a ranch to discuss a discrepancy about money that was supposedly owed to the cartel and recorded in ledgers that Jessica handled. The witness also said El Mencho personally gave her the Cabañas business to manage. This was not a daughter who happened to be in the wrong place. This was a daughter who, according to federal prosecutors, was directly handling cartel money on her father's behalf. For years, Jessica lived between Mexico and the United States without being arrested. From April 2015 to February 2018, she and her daughter Laisha filed 6 writs of amparo in courts based in Jalisco and Mexico City to prevent law enforcement from arresting them. An amparo is a legal protection under Mexican law, similar to an injunction. For 3 years, those legal protections kept them out of handcuffs. But in February 2020, everything changed. On February 21st, Jessica's brother Ruben, El Menchito, was extradited from Mexico to the United States. He was flown to Washington, D.C. to face drug trafficking charges. A week later, Jessica flew from Mexico to California, and then from California to Washington, D.C. to attend her brother's court hearing. According to Infobae, the morning before she went to the courthouse, she attended a church service to receive the ash cross that marks the beginning of Lent, because her friends and family said she was deeply religious. On February 26, 2020, Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez walked into the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. She was wearing a Rolex watch. She had on a Louis Vuitton coat. She was carrying a Hermes purse and a large amount of cash. DEA agents were waiting. There was already a sealed indictment against her and an active arrest warrant. She was taken into custody right there at the courthouse. The woman who had come to support her brother at his hearing ended up becoming a defendant in the same building. She was charged with 5 counts of violating the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. Each count accused her of engaging in transactions or dealings in property of a specially designated narcotics trafficker. The maximum sentence she faced was 30 years in prison. Jessica initially pleaded not guilty. Her defense attorney, Stephen McCool, told NBC News at the time that the charges were false and that he was certain a jury would quickly clear her name. But over the next year, as the evidence mounted and the government laid out its case, her legal position shifted. On March 12, 2021, Jessica changed her plea to guilty on all 5 counts. She admitted to willfully engaging in financial dealings with Mexican companies that had been identified as specially designated narcotics traffickers. She admitted she knew the businesses were sanctioned. She admitted she did not get the required license to continue operating them. On June 11, 2021, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell sentenced her to 30 months in prison. That is 2.5 years. She had faced up to 30 years. Her attorney asked that she be sent to a federal prison camp in Dublin, California to serve her time. The judge agreed with the recommendation for the facility. Jessica was credited with the time she had already spent in jail since her arrest. Acting Assistant Attorney General Nicholas McQuaid of the Justice Department's Criminal Division said after the sentencing that the case showed that violating the Treasury Department's sanctions against businesses tied to foreign drug cartels would not go unpunished. He called the Kingpin Act an important tool in the government's efforts to dismantle drug cartels. More than 20 letters were sent to the court by Jessica's friends, family, and acquaintances asking for leniency. They described her as a kind woman, loved by her nieces, aunts, and friends. They talked about how she supported people in difficult situations, gave to charity, and was an example to the younger women in her family. Some of those letters came from religious leaders in Jalisco. Her supporters painted a picture of someone who was generous, devoted, and caught up in something bigger than herself. The court acknowledged the letters, but handed down the sentence. Jessica was scheduled to be released from federal custody on April 13, 2022. But she got out early. On March 14, 2022, after serving approximately 25 months, she was released under the First Step Act, a federal law designed to reduce prison populations. Several drug trafficking charges under federal law specifically prohibit early release under the First Step Act. But Jessica's charges, which were Kingpin Act violations related to financial transactions rather than direct drug trafficking, did not fall under that list. She walked out of prison a free woman. Since her release, Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez has kept an extremely low profile. Authorities have not publicly disclosed her exact location or what she is doing. There have been no verified reports of additional criminal charges or active involvement in cartel operations. In Mexico, she still faces investigations. In February 2023, the Mexican Attorney General's office froze a bank account connected to her. She attempted to get an amparo to unfreeze the funds, but the Second Collegiate Criminal Court of the Third Circuit rejected her request. And then, on February 22, 2026, her father was killed. The Mexican army killed El Mencho during a military operation in Tapalpa, Jalisco. He was wounded in a firefight and died while being airlifted to a hospital. Within hours, violence erupted across more than 20 Mexican states. Buses were set on fire. Highways were blocked, gunmen clashed with security forces, and in the middle of all of that chaos, Jessica's name surfaced again. Multiple news outlets and analysts in Mexico began discussing her as a possible figure in the line of succession for CJNG leadership. Infobae reported that she had emerged as a central figure in discussions about what comes next for the cartel. Her brother Ruben is serving life in a United States prison. Her mother, Rosalinda, was released from a Mexican prison just days before El Mencho's death. Her sister, Laisha, has stayed mostly out of the public eye. Her father's most trusted brothers are either in U.S. custody or locked up in Mexico. Whether Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez steps into any kind of leadership role is something no one can say for certain right now. What can be said is this. She walked into a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., wearing designer clothes and carrying cash, expecting to sit in the gallery and watch her brother's hearing. She walked out in handcuffs. She served 25 months in a United States prison for running businesses that the government said were laundering money for the most powerful cartel in Mexico. She got out early. She went quiet. And now, with her father dead and her brother locked away for life, her name is being spoken again in ways that would have been unthinkable when she was handing out tamales at hospitals in Guadalajara. The girl who studied marketing at a private university is now at the center of one of the most dangerous power vacuums in the history of the Mexican drug trade. Whether she wants to be there or not is a question only she can answer. But the Oseguera name does not let people walk away quietly. Her father proved that. Her brother proved that. And the 6 businesses she refused to let go of, even after the United States government told her exactly what would happen, proved it too. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section number 3. Rosalinda González Valencia was born in 1963 in El Naranjo, a small rural community in the municipality of Aguililla, in the Mexican state of Michoacán. She was the eldest daughter in a family that, according to the Mexican government, included at least 18 siblings, 10 brothers and 8 sisters. The boys were Abigail, José María, Arnulfo, Ulysses Jovani, Elvis, Edgar Eden, Mauricio, Gerardo, José, and Luis Ángel. The girls were Rosalinda, Noemi, Berenice, Marisa Yvette, Maria Elena, Erika, and Abigail. People in their hometown gave the family a nickname. They called them Los Queenies, after a small squirrel found in the region known as the Queenique. That squirrel is known for giving birth to over a dozen babies at a time. The nickname stuck because the family kept growing, and eventually, it became the name of one of the most powerful money laundering organizations in the history of Mexican organized crime. When Rosalinda was young, her family was poor. They grew avocados on a small piece of land they owned in Michoacán. Aguililla sits in the heart of Mexico's avocado country, and at that time, farming was how families in the area survived. But by the 1970s, the González Valencia family began to shift. They started cultivating marijuana and opium poppy alongside their avocado crops and began trafficking those drugs from Mexico into the United States. What started as a side operation grew quickly. Rosalinda's uncle, Armando Valencia Cornelio, known as El Maradona, became the leader of a criminal group that would eventually be called the Milenio Cartel. The Milenio Cartel was based in Michoacán and became one of the first Mexican criminal organizations to specialize in producing synthetic drugs. By the 1990s, the family had connections to Colombian drug traffickers and was moving massive quantities of narcotics across the border. Rosalinda's economic situation changed dramatically when her brothers emigrated to the United States in the 1980s and got involved in the drug trade in California. Several of them worked directly for the Milenio Cartel. Her brother Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, known as El Queenie, would eventually become the leader of Los Queenies and one of the most powerful cartel financiers in Mexico. Another brother, Jose Gonzalez Valencia, known as El Chepa, ran drug trafficking operations that used boats, semi-submersible vessels, and aircraft to move cocaine from South America through Mexico and into the United States. A third brother, Gerardo, oversaw money laundering operations that extended as far as Uruguay, where he was eventually arrested in 2015. At least 7 of Rosalinda's siblings ended up on United States Treasury Department blacklists for their involvement in narcotics trafficking. Security forces believe that before she met El Mencho, Rosalinda was involved with her uncle, Armando Valencia Cornelio, the Milenio Cartel's founder. They eventually separated in the 1990s. El Mencho, whose real name was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, grew up in the same rural community as Rosalinda's family. He had worked as a guard for the clan's marijuana plantations since he was a teenager. He later joined Rosalinda's brothers in the drug trade in the United States, where he was arrested multiple times and deported back to Mexico. After his final deportation, he joined the local police force in Jalisco. It was not long before he left law enforcement and went back to the drug business full-time. Rosalinda and El Mencho married in 1996. That marriage brought together 2 things the cartel needed to grow. El Mencho had the muscle, the ruthlessness, and the ambition. Rosalinda and her family had the money, the connections, and the business know-how. As the Spanish newspaper El País described it, the marriage sealed an alliance between the world of bazookas and the world of dollars. Together, they had 3 children: Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez, known as La Negra; Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito; and Laisha Michelle Oseguera Gonzalez. Rosalinda also had a son from her previous relationship, Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, who reportedly rose to a high-ranking position within the CJNG as El Mencho's stepson. As the CJNG grew from a regional criminal group into one of the most powerful cartels on the planet, Rosalinda's role grew with it. According to Mexico's Secretariat of the Interior, she was responsible for overseeing the CJNG's financial and legal resources. That included managing over 70 businesses affiliated with the cartel. These were not shady backroom operations. They included companies in healthcare, tourism, hospitality, retail, consulting, agriculture, advertising, real estate, and international trade. The businesses looked legitimate on paper. They filed taxes. They had employees. But according to Mexican authorities, their real purpose was to clean the billions of pesos flowing in from drug sales. Between 2015 and 2016, Mexican authorities suspected that Rosalinda was responsible for laundering over 1 billion Mexican pesos, which at the time was over $50 million US. The money moved through a network of 73 companies, many of which were connected to the Gonzalez Valencia family. Her sisters, Maria Yvette and Noemi, were also suspected of involvement. So were Jennifer Beanie Camacho Cazares, the wife of her brother Abigail, and Wendy DeLathy Amaral Arevalo, the wife of her brother Gerardo. The women of the Gonzalez Valencia family were not spectators. They were running the financial side of the operation. From April 2015 to February 2018, Rosalinda and her daughter Jessica Johanna filed 6 writs of amparo in courts based in Jalisco and Mexico City to prevent law enforcement from arresting them. For 3 years, those legal protections worked. On May 28, 2018, that protection ran out. Rosalinda was arrested outside a 7-Eleven store in Guadalajara on money laundering charges. It was the first time she had ever been taken into custody. She was sent to a women's correctional facility in the state of Morelos. 3 months later, in September 2018, a judge released her after she paid bail of 1.5 million Mexican pesos, roughly $78,000. She walked out and returned to her life. According to Mexico's Secretariat of National Defense, Rosalinda and El Mencho had separated on May 26, 2018, just 2 days before her first arrest. Despite the separation, they remained legally married. Reports indicated that El Mencho began a relationship with a woman named Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo around that same time. For the next 3 years, Rosalinda stayed out of prison, but the government had not stopped watching. In June 2021, a federal judge formally linked her to a case involving the network of 73 companies that had allegedly laundered over $1 billion pesos for the CJNG between 2015 and 2016. On November 15, 2021, members of the Mexican military moved into the Zapopan municipality in Jalisco and arrested Rosalinda for a second time. The Mexican Ministry of Defense released a statement calling her arrest a significant blow to the financial structure of organized crime in the state. At the time of this arrest, she was identified as the chief of the CJNG's financial operations. 5 of her brothers and 2 of her children were already in custody. With so many family members behind bars, investigators considered her one of the last remaining links between the CJNG and the Los Queenies money laundering network. Hours after Rosalinda was arrested, 2 members of the Mexican Navy disappeared. Her daughter, Laisha Oseguera Gonzalez, and Laisha's partner, Cristian Fernando Gutierrez Ochoa, were suspected of organizing the kidnapping in retaliation for her mother's arrest. That kidnapping would later lead to one of the most bizarre chapters in this story, when Gutierrez Ochoa faked his own death and fled to California. But that is a different section entirely. In prison, Rosalinda's health began to decline. She suffered from hypertension. In August 2023, the Spanish newspaper La Vanguardia reported that her health condition was considered extremely delicate and serious, and that she had an undisclosed terminal illness. Her defense team requested that she receive medical treatment, and a court in the state of Morelos accepted the request. In December 2023, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for financial crimes. The charge was specifically for hiding income that she knew came from illegal activities, but she would not serve the full 5 years. On January 29, 2025, a judge granted Rosalinda early release for good conduct, noting that she had served more than half of her sentence. On February 27, 2025, Rosalinda González Valencia walked out of the Federal Center for Social Readaptation for Women in Coatlán del Río, Morelos. She was free. The timing of her release raised questions. It came just 1 day after an unprecedented event in Mexican legal history. On February 27, 2025, Mexico transferred 29 high-profile drug trafficking figures to the United States in a mass extradition. Among them was El Mencho's brother, Antonio "Tony" Montana Oseguera Cervantes. Among them was Rafael Caro Quintero, one of the most notorious drug lords in Mexican history. The fact that Rosalinda was released on the same day that her brother-in-law was sent to the United States led to speculation about whether her freedom was part of a broader political arrangement between the Mexican and American governments. No direct evidence of any deal has been made public, but the coincidence was hard to ignore. Since her release, Rosalinda has kept a low profile. Then came February 22, 2026. The Mexican army killed her husband, El Mencho, during a military operation in Tapalpa, Jalisco. He was wounded in a firefight with special forces and died while being airlifted to a hospital. According to a report published the same day on Substack by journalist Deborah Bonello, who covers organized crime in Mexico, Rosalinda was likely not far from where El Mencho was killed, somewhere in the Jalisco cartel heartland. Whether she was mourning, whether she was planning, whether she was running, no one outside her immediate circle knows for certain. What is known is this: Rosalinda González Valencia was not simply the wife of a drug lord. She was born into one of the oldest drug trafficking families in Michoacán. Her family grew avocados before they grew marijuana. They formed the Milenio Cartel before the CJNG even existed. Her brothers built Los Queenies into a financial machine that laundered hundreds of millions of dollars through shopping malls, hotels, restaurants, tequila companies, and real estate agencies across Mexico, Brazil, and Uruguay. When she married El Mencho in 1996, she did not join a cartel. She merged two cartel families into one. El Mencho provided the guns. Rosalinda and her family provided the books. Together, they built the Jalisco New Generation Cartel into what the DEA would eventually call one of the most violent and prolific drug trafficking organizations in the world. Her son is serving life in a United States prison. Her daughter served 25 months for laundering money through sushi restaurants and tequila brands. Her brother Abigail was extradited to the United States in August 2025. Her brother Jose is serving 30 years in a U.S. prison. Her brother-in-law Antonio was extradited in February 2025. Her husband is dead. And Rosalinda herself spent years behind bars before walking out on what appeared to be good behavior. Every member of the family that built the CJNG has been arrested, extradited, imprisoned, or killed. Every single one. And the woman they called La Jefa, the boss, the eldest sister of the clan that started it all, is now somewhere in Mexico, free, reportedly ill, and watching the empire her family built come apart at the seams. The squirrels of Aguililla had a lot of babies, and the law came for every one of them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section number 4. Cristian Fernando Gutierrez Ochoa was 37 years old when United States law enforcement finally caught up with him. By that point, he had spent years as a high-ranking member of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, had allegedly coordinated the movement of tens of thousands of kilograms of drugs, had kidnapped 2 members of the Mexican Navy, had faked his own death with the help of one of the most powerful drug lords in the world, and had been living quietly in a luxury home in Riverside, California, under a completely fake identity. His story reads like something from a movie. Every detail of it is real. Gutierrez Ochoa's connection to the CJNG was personal. He was the romantic partner of Laisha Michelle Oseguera González, the youngest daughter of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the man known as El Mencho. That made Gutierrez Ochoa El Mencho's son-in-law. In cartel families, that kind of relationship is not just romantic. It is a business arrangement. It is a position of trust. And according to federal prosecutors, Gutierrez Ochoa used that trust to rise quickly through the organization. According to court documents filed by the United States Department of Justice, Gutierrez Ochoa began working for the CJNG around 2014. From that point forward, he personally coordinated the transportation and distribution of approximately 40,000 kilograms of methamphetamine and approximately 2,000 kilograms of cocaine within Mexico, with those drugs intended for distribution in the United States. 40,000 kilograms of methamphetamine is roughly 88,000 pounds. 2,000 kilograms of cocaine is roughly 4,400 pounds. These are not street-level quantities. These are industrial shipments that moved across borders, through supply chains, and into American communities at a scale that the DEA described as contributing to unprecedented destruction. Prosecutors alleged that Gutierrez Ochoa did not just move drugs. He used violence to protect the operation. According to a DEA agent's affidavit, he was a dangerous, trained operative who carried out the cartel's bidding through force when necessary. He was not a bookkeeper or a middleman. He was described by the Justice Department as a high-ranking member who was connected to the CJNG's top leadership, meaning he had direct access to El Mencho himself. Then came November 2021. That month, Mexican military forces arrested El Mencho's wife, Rosalinda González Valencia, in the Zapopan municipality of Jalisco. She was taken into custody on money laundering charges and identified as the chief of the CJNG's financial operations. The arrest shook the organization, and according to prosecutors, what Gutierrez Ochoa did next showed just how far people inside the cartel were willing to go to protect the family. Within hours of Rosalinda's arrest, 2 members of the Mexican Navy disappeared. According to court documents filed by the Department of Justice and a DEA agent's affidavit, Gutierrez Ochoa allegedly kidnapped them. The purpose, prosecutors said, was to use the 2 Navy members as leverage to force Mexican authorities to release El Mencho's wife. Gutierrez Ochoa and Laisha Oseguera González, El Mencho's daughter, were both suspected of organizing the kidnapping as a retaliatory move. The kidnapping brought a level of heat that Gutierrez Ochoa could not survive in Mexico. He was now wanted by Mexican authorities for taking 2 military personnel hostage. The CJNG was under enormous pressure. The Mexican government was closing in on the cartel's inner circle. El Mencho's wife was in custody. El Mencho's son was already in a United States prison awaiting trial. El Mencho's daughter, Jessica, had already been arrested and convicted. The walls were closing in on every side. So Gutierrez Ochoa did something extraordinary. He faked his own death. According to court documents, El Mencho himself helped make the scheme work. El Mencho told associates within the cartel that he had personally killed Gutierrez Ochoa for lying. That story served 2 purposes. First, it removed Gutierrez Ochoa from the cartel's radar. If people inside the organization believed he was dead, no one would come looking for him. Second, it removed him from Mexican law enforcement's radar. If Mexican authorities believed El Mencho had already dealt with the problem internally, the immediate urgency of tracking Gutierrez Ochoa down would fade. With the cover story in place, Gutierrez Ochoa fled Mexico and crossed into the United States. He assumed a false identity. He settled in Riverside, California, a city of about 300,000 people in the Inland Empire east of Los Angeles. And there, in a quiet, upscale neighborhood, he moved into a house with El Mencho's daughter, Laisha, who was a United States citizen. The house was valued at $1.2 million. According to prosecutors, the money used to purchase it came directly from CJNG drug trafficking proceeds that had been laundered through real estate transactions, shell companies, and international money transfers. Prosecutors described the life Gutierrez Ochoa and Laisha were living as a CJNG-sponsored life of abundance. For roughly 3 years, the scheme worked. Gutierrez Ochoa lived under his fake name. He stayed out of the cartel's active operations, at least publicly. He lived in a luxury home in Southern California, thousands of miles from the violence and chaos that was tearing the CJNG apart, as law enforcement picked off member after member of El Mencho's inner circle. But the DEA had not stopped looking. According to a report by the ABC-7I team in Chicago, investigators from the DEA's Los Angeles Field Division were tracking Gutierrez Ochoa. They gathered evidence. They identified his fake identity. They located the Riverside home. And on November 19, 2024, federal agents executed an arrest warrant. When agents entered the property, they found more than $2 million in cash. They found several ghost guns, which are homemade firearms with no serial numbers that cannot be traced through normal law enforcement databases. They found multiple fake identification documents. The man who was supposed to be dead was very much alive, very much wealthy, and very much armed. Gutierrez Ochoa was taken into custody and transported to Washington, D.C. to face federal charges. He was charged with conspiracy to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine and 500 grams or more of methamphetamine, knowing and intending that those drugs would be imported into the United States. He was also charged with conspiracy to launder the CJNG's drug trafficking proceeds. If convicted on the drug distribution charge alone, he faced a mandatory minimum of 10 years in prison and a maximum of life. Nicole Argentieri, a senior Justice Department official, said at the time of his arrest that Gutierrez Ochoa allegedly directed the importation of tons of methamphetamine and cocaine into the United States and engaged in violence to aid the cartels. Criminal activities. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco said that the arrest was proof that the Jalisco Cartel, one of the world's most violent and prolific drug trafficking organizations, is weaker today because of the tenacious efforts of law enforcement to track down and arrest a cartel leader. DEA Administrator Ann Milgram said the arrest brought the agency much closer to defeating the CJNG, and specifically called out Gutierrez Ochoa's role as both a high-ranking member of the cartel and the son-in-law of El Mencho. In June 2025, Gutierrez Ochoa appeared in the same Washington, D.C. courtroom where El Mencho's son had been sentenced to life just months earlier, and where El Mencho's brother-in-law, Jose Gonzalez Valencia, had been sentenced to 30 years. Standing before U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell, the same judge who had presided over those other cases, Gutierrez Ochoa pleaded guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit international money laundering. According to the Department of Justice, he admitted that he was a member of the CJNG, who was connected to the cartel's top leadership. He admitted that from at least 2023 until his arrest in 2024, he and other CJNG operatives used sophisticated money laundering methods involving real estate transactions, shell companies, and international money transfers to launder the cartel's drug trafficking proceeds. Justice Department prosecutors recommended a 14-year sentence. They described Gutierrez Ochoa in their sentencing memorandum as a dangerous, trained operative who had been secretly embedded in the United States to carry out the CJNG's operations. Prosecutors wrote that the cartel kills, tortures, and corrupts to traffic staggering quantities of cocaine, methamphetamine, and other drugs into the United States and elsewhere, all for profiting and enrichment, which in turn fund the cycle of violence, ravaging countless lives and communities. Gutierrez Ochoa's defense attorneys asked for 7 years. They said he was remorseful. They said he accepted responsibility. They wrote in their sentencing filing that his rehabilitation was not performative and that it reflects a young man who now fully understands the magnitude of his mistakes and who seeks to rebuild his life with integrity. On December 18, 2025, Judge Howell handed down her sentence: 11 years and 8 months in federal prison. Not the 14 years prosecutors wanted, not the 7 years the defense asked for. Somewhere in between. The judge noted that the CJNG was not just dangerous in Mexico, but was also a dangerous force in the United States. She looked at Gutierrez Ochoa and said 6 words that summed up everything about his situation and the cartel world he chose to enter. "It's a dangerous way to make a living," she said. "It's a dangerous way to live." Less than 2 months after his sentencing, on February 22, 2026, the man who had been at the center of Gutierrez Ochoa's entire world was killed. El Mencho, the father of the woman he lived with, the man who had helped him fake his own death, the man who had told the cartel he had murdered his own son-in-law to cover for his escape, was shot and killed by Mexican Army Special Forces in Tapalpa, Jalisco. El Mencho died while being airlifted to a hospital. The $15 million bounty the United States had placed on his head went uncollected through an informant. He went down in a gunfight, surrounded by rocket launchers and armored vehicles, in the mountains of the same state where he built his empire. Gutierrez Ochoa is currently sitting in a United States federal prison. He will be there until roughly 2036 if he serves the full sentence. The $1.2 million house in Riverside, where he lived his quiet California life with El Mencho's daughter, has been seized. The $2 million in cash found inside is gone. The ghost guns are in evidence. The fake identities are burned. The man who faked his own death to escape the consequences of working for the most powerful cartel in Mexico ended up in the same federal courthouse, in front of the same judge, as the cartel leader's own son. The CJNG helped Gutierrez Ochoa disappear. They bought him a house. They gave him a new name. They let him live a life of luxury in a country that was actively hunting the very organization funding his lifestyle. And in the end, none of it mattered. The DEA found him anyway. The walls of the Riverside house were paid for with drug money. The walls of his prison cell are paid for by the United States government. The difference between the two is that he is never leaving the second one voluntarily. El Mencho told people he killed his son-in-law. It turns out the only thing he really did was delay the inevitable. The cartel could fake a death. It could not fake a life. And when the agents came through the door in November 2024, the pretending was over. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section number 5. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born on July 17, 1966, in the rural community of Aguililla, Michoacán. He grew up poor. His family grew avocados. He dropped out of school after the 5th grade to work in the fields. By age 14, he was guarding marijuana plantations. He had 5 brothers. Their names were Juan, Miguel, Antonio, Marin, and Abraham. All of them grew up in the same poverty. All of them ended up on the wrong side of the law. And the two who climbed highest inside their brother's criminal empire, Antonio and Abraham, both ended up exactly where the law said they would. In handcuffs, in courtrooms, in cells. This is their story. Antonio Oseguera Cervantes was born on August 20th, 1958, in Aguililla, Michoacán. That made him 8 years older than his brother Nemesio. He went by the alias Tony Montana, after the character from the 1983 movie Scarface. He also used a fake legal name, Joel Mora Garibay, on forged identification documents. Like his younger brother, Antonio crossed illegally into the United States in the 1980s and got involved in the drug trade. In 1996, he was arrested in the United States on heroin charges and deported back to Mexico. But he did not stay clean. He went right back into the business. He later served time in a Mississippi prison and was released in 2001 after completing a sentence for property damage. After that, he returned to Mexico permanently and joined his brother's operation. By the time the CJNG was officially formed around 2010 and 2011, Antonio had become one of the cartel's most important operators. According to the Mexican government, he served as a logistics operator, meaning he was responsible for several key parts of the business. He supervised the buying and selling of firearms for the CJNG. He managed money laundering operations. He passed information about law enforcement activities to the cartel leadership, acting as an intelligence link. And he coordinated what the Mexican government described as violent actions against antagonistic groups, meaning he helped plan attacks on rival cartels. He operated primarily from the Guadalajara metropolitan area in Jalisco, staying close to the center of the CJNG's power. On December 3, 2015, police and soldiers finally caught up with him. Federal police had been tracking Antonio for 6 months. They knew he was living a low-profile life, trying to avoid attention. That afternoon, he was driving a 2010 Volkswagen Jetta through Tlajomulco, Jalisco, near his home. He was alone. No bodyguard. When he spotted a checkpoint manned by federal police and the Mexican army, he tried to drive around it. Officers ordered him to stop. When they approached the car, he identified himself using a fake ID under the name Joel Mora Garibay and claimed to be a clothing merchant. Police arrested him on the spot. Inside the vehicle, they found 2 assault rifles, a handgun, and a package containing narcotics. The federal police chief, Enrique Francisco Galindo Ceballos, confirmed the arrest the following day at a press conference. He called it a major blow to the CJNG's financial operations. Antonio was sent to the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 11, a maximum security prison in Hermosillo, Sonora. Prosecutors charged him with drug trafficking and possession of military-exclusive firearms. A federal court confirmed the charges on December 15th, after concluding that he had been found in possession of 1,000.1 grams of methamphetamine with intent to distribute. But then the case fell apart. Antonio's defense team filed a writ of amparo, a type of legal protection in the Mexican court system. On July 15, 2016, an appeals court in Jalisco granted the amparo after discovering that a key court document used to formally charge him was missing a required judge's signature. That document contained the fingerprint evidence linking Antonio to the weapons and drugs seized during his arrest. It also included his vehicle information and the results of his mental and behavioral exams. Without the signature, the court ruled that there were due process violations. Antonio Oseguera Cervantes walked free. 3 months later, on October 27, 2016, the United States Department of the Treasury sanctioned Antonio under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. The Treasury accused him of providing financial and material assistance to the CJNG. His assets in the United States were frozen. American citizens and businesses were prohibited from doing any kind of transaction with him. 8 other individuals connected to the CJNG and Los Queenies were sanctioned the same day. For 6 years after his release, Antonio remained free in Mexico. Then, on December 20th, 2022, the Mexican army moved in again. They found him at a safe house in Tlajomulco de Zúñiga, just outside Guadalajara. According to a government press release, they seized several weapons and a package believed to be cocaine. The Mexican government said his arrest represented a forceful blow to one of the criminal organizations in the country. This time, authorities held him. In January 2023, a federal indictment was filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, charging Antonio with conspiracy to distribute cocaine and methamphetamine for importation into the United States. A Mexican judge approved his extradition to the United States. On February 27, 2025, Antonio was sent to the United States as part of an unprecedented mass extradition of 29 Mexican drug trafficking figures. Among those transferred alongside him were Rafael Caro Quintero, one of the most notorious drug lords in Mexican history, and leaders of Los Zetas and the Juarez Cartel. It was the largest single transfer of cartel figures from Mexico to the United States ever recorded. After arriving in the United States, Antonio appeared before a federal magistrate judge in Washington, D.C. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. The court ordered him detained without bail, citing his flight risk, his prior escapes from Mexican custody, and his ties to the CJNG. If convicted, he faces up to life in prison. As of early 2026, no trial date has been set. His defense attorney, Frank Perez, asked the court for additional time to negotiate a possible plea agreement with prosecutors. Then there is Abraham. Abraham Oseguera Cervantes, known as Don Rodo, was the eldest of the Oseguera brothers. He was born in the mid-1950s in Aguililla, Michoacán. Like his brothers, he crossed into the United States as a young man and got involved in the heroin trade. In September 1992, Abraham and his younger brother Nemesio walked into a bar called The Imperial in San Francisco, California, to sell 5 ounces of heroin, roughly 140 grams. The buyers paid $9,500, but the buyers were undercover police officers, and the bills were marked. 3 weeks later, both brothers were arrested on federal charges. Nemesio initially maintained his innocence, but prosecutors warned him that if he did not take responsibility, Abraham would bear the full weight of the charges and could face a life sentence. Nemesio pleaded guilty to protect his older brother. Abraham received a 10-year prison sentence in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California for conspiracy to distribute heroin and possession of a firearm by a felon. He was also charged with illegal re-entry into the United States. After serving his sentence, he was deported back to Mexico. Back in Michoacán, Abraham took on what security analysts described as a discrete administrative role within the CJNG. He was not a gunman. He was not a plaza boss running street-level operations. According to Mexico's Secretariat of Security and Citizen Protection, Abraham was responsible for laundering money for his brother Nemesio through the purchase of ranches, land, and properties across Mexico. He worked with notary public offices in Ciudad Guzman and Autlán de Navarro, both towns in Jalisco, to manage the paperwork for changing property ownership records on the land and buildings he purchased for the cartel. His wife, Virginia León Osornio, was also suspected of laundering cartel money by investing in gold mines in the states of Michoacán and Nayarit. In 2013, Mexican authorities accused Abraham of murder in Michoacán, but the charges were eventually dropped, and the case was closed because it was time-barred. On April 21, 2024, members of the Mexican National Guard arrested Abraham in the municipality of Autlán de Navarro, Jalisco. According to the National Register of Arrests, the detention happened shortly before 4 in the morning. He was found in possession of firearms and a small quantity of drugs. He was immediately transported by the Mexican Air Force to Mexico City and taken to the Special Prosecutor's Office for Organized Crime. From there, he was sent to the Altiplano Maximum Security Prison, the same facility from which Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán had famously escaped in 2015. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador confirmed the arrest at his morning press conference the following day. Then it all collapsed again. 9 days later, on April 30th, 2024, Federal Judge Rogelio León Díaz ordered Abraham's release. The judge found contradictions in the police account of how the arrest happened. Video evidence presented at the hearing showed 5 federal agents arriving at the property with a battering ram to break the door locks before a helicopter arrived to transport the detainee. No search warrant had been obtained. No armed men were visible outside the property in the way officers had described. A fingerprint analysis report concluded that Abraham's fingerprints were not on the 2 firearms that had been seized from him. The Attorney General's office could not produce evidence from any separate investigation to press other charges. Abraham left the Altiplano prison at 1 in the morning on April 30th and disappeared into the night in a private vehicle. President López Obrador publicly expressed frustration, calling the release evidence of corruption within the judicial system. 10 months later, the government got a second chance. On February 28, 2025, members of the Mexican National Guard were patrolling the small town of Atarjeas de Covarrubias in southwest Jalisco when they noticed suspicious activity. They followed a man and identified him as Abraham Oseguera Cervantes. He was arrested, along with 3 other CJNG members. All 4 were armed and carrying cash and drugs. According to Mexican authorities, Abraham was once again charged with illegal possession of military-exclusive firearms and crimes against health and safety. He was sent back to detention. The timing was not a coincidence. His arrest came just 1 day after the unprecedented mass extradition of 29 cartel figures to the United States on February 27th. The same transfer that included his brother Antonio. A Mexico City district judge named Juan Mateo Brieba de Castro subsequently blocked any move to extradite Abraham to the United States, at least temporarily. As of early 2026, Abraham remained in Mexican custody, awaiting further legal proceedings. Then came February 22, 2026. The Mexican army killed their brother. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, was shot during a military operation in Tapalpa, Jalisco, and died while being airlifted to a hospital. The man who had built the Jalisco New Generation cartel from the remnants of a collapsed criminal group into one of the 2 most powerful drug trafficking organizations on the planet was dead. The $15 million bounty the United States had placed on his head expired with a bullet, not an arrest warrant. After the news broke, News Nation reported that Antonio's extradition to the United States had high-ranking CJNG members worried, not because they mourned him, but because they feared what he might tell American prosecutors. Antonio had been inside the CJNG's inner circle for decades. He knew the supply chains. He knew the financial networks. He knew where El Mencho had hidden. And now El Mencho was dead. which meant the loyalty that once kept mouths shut might not hold much longer. The Oseguera brothers grew up together in the avocado fields of Aguililla. They crossed into the United States together. They sold heroin together in a bar in San Francisco and got caught together. Nemesio pleaded guilty to save Abraham from a life sentence. Decades later, Nemesio built an empire, and his brothers helped him run it. Antonio bought the guns. Abraham bought the land. And the law came for all of them. Antonio is in a federal holding facility in Washington, D.C., staring down the possibility of life in prison. Abraham is in a Mexican prison cell, waiting to find out if a judge will send him north to join his brother. And Nemesio, the youngest of the three who started it all, is gone. He died in the mountains of the same state where he ran his cartel. The brothers who helped him build it are now alone in the system, with no one left to protect them and nothing left to protect. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.